What is going on, peeps? It's Wrath here, hanging out today, playing some Idle Heroes. I want to thank you guys so much for coming to hang out with me today. If you liked the video, don't forget, smash that thumbs up button to show your support, and if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe as well. Alright guys, today what we're going to be talking about is the top heroes, and today we're going through the Fortress faction, because last time we did the Shadow, we're moving this way, and we're going to keep moving this way. That's how we're going to do it. So today, we're going to be talking about the Fortress faction, the top heroes in the faction, and here's a little cheat sheet. In 99.9% of cases, the best heroes from any faction will be the newest ones launched. The newest heroes are launched at the bottom of the screen. So, whatever one's in the last slot, usually they're the best ones. They're usually the best ones. No different today. But anyways, we're going to jump in here and we're going to talk about which heroes are the best, that in my opinion. Everyone has different opinions. If you don't like them, then okay. Anyways, the best heroes in my opinion. Then we'll talk a little bit about some mid-game heroes. There's not a lot of offerings for the mid-game, early game in Fortress, which is why it's kind of one of the underused factions in the game right now. It does have some awesome units, don't get me wrong, but there's just not a lot for early to mid-game that's easy access. So we'll start things out here with Kablowie, the Shia, the newest unit in the game. Well, not the newest unit in the game. The most newest unit for the Fortress faction, but she is an interesting character because she's really solid in most areas of the game. When it comes to PvE, she drops respectable damage with the highest attack stat in the game, I do believe. I'm like 99.2% sure about that. Pretty low health though, she's a little squishy, but when it comes to boss fighting, that attack pairs really well with her heavy dots, her big burst damage. It's not bad, but it also pairs well in PvP. When you're fighting people, heavy burst damage is not a bad thing. You can drop some nasty numbers, put people down really quickly, and it just works. She's nice. When it comes to the Aspen dungeon, though, Shia is not a primary Aspen unit. You don't run her as your main, but you can absolutely run her as your node breaker for tough nodes. Namely, the healer nodes, your Belrain, Michelle's and stuff in the Hell nodes plus. Shia deals with those very well. Probably one of the best units for dealing with those, in my opinion. Personal preference, I have one. But she's really solid at it. So we'll get through reader skills and such like we always do with the top heroes. And then for the mid-game, we won't go quite into so much detail on them. And then fodder tier heroes, we'll just kind of talk about them. We'll just be like, these are fodder tier heroes. That's what we're going to do. So anyways, we'll start things out here. Bam. The active skill, Whirlwind Sweep. Hot news. Deals 396% of her attack as damage, which is a massive amount of damage, by the way. That's a heavy drop in skill right there, okay? It drops it against the enemy with the highest attack, which is really important because it's also going to reduce that enemy's attack by 40%. That's a lot. That's a lot. For 3 rounds, it gradually decreases the attack by 10% each round. It's really powerful. Not only does it drop a huge amount of damage, it's going to hit the guy with the highest attack and then make that guy hit less hard. Really nice. But it's also going to deal 290% of her attack as bleed damage for 2 rounds. Again, you've got a huge burst coming in, hitting their biggest damage unit. Most of the time, the unit that drops the most damage has the most attack. In Valkyrie's case, not necessarily true, but against most units, it's true. Anyways, it's going to hit that person really hard, make them hit you less hard, and then drop a nasty dot on top of all that. So, it's solid. It's needless to say, it's a good active skill. It's pretty powerful. That brings us to her first passive. It boosts her attack and block by 70%. It's kind of important. Control immune by 30% and speed by 30%. There's a lot of stuff going on here for a kind of quote-unquote run-of-the-mill passive. Block by 70% we'll talk about in a second because it pairs into one of her other passives. Control immune by 30% is fantastic. It works in every area. When you're fighting bosses that have crowd control, this is nice. When you're in PvP, this is nice. That 30 extra speed, you'd be like, it's nice. It makes her one of the fastest units in the game. Now, of course, there are units faster than her, but she is very, very close to the top. Very, very fast unit, and that's very handy when you're trying to burst people. We'll get to that. Bam. Next passive. When she blocks successfully, she boosts her own crit by 20% and attack by 15% each round for 4 rounds. This is pretty solid. So if you run, say, a Shia in your 1 slot in PvP, she's going to get hit, generally speaking, 6 times. Depending on what the enemy team's made of, she might, they might hit backline or something weird with their basic attacks. It happens. But generally, she's going to get hit at least 3 or 4 times by enemies' basic attacks. What that's going to do is she's going to block it. She has a high natural block rate, which means she's probably going to block a few of those. And if you build her for block, she's going to definitely block them. So things like the Augustus Magic Ball, hot news for a Shia. Really good stuff. Anyways, she's going to have that huge amount of crit and attack for the next round to drop her active skill. That's why that speed's important. Being really, really fast means she's going to be one of the first people to drop her attack on the next round. With a heavy damage skill like this, it is possible for her to nuke somebody to death on round 2. Just straight up, open up with a kill. It's not bad. Not bad news at all. So that passive is actually really important. This passive is really... everything she has is pretty important. She's a solid hero. Last passive here, her basic attack deals 260% of her attack as damage to the enemy with the lowest HP, and then deals 180% of her attack as bleed damage for 2 rounds. So even Shia's basic attack hits like a truck. It hits really, really hard, 260% of her attack, highest attack stat in the game, against the enemy with the lowest HP. So the squishiest unit on the enemy team is going to get hit by Shia, and get a nasty dot dropped on top of it. Not bad news, it definitely works out, it's nice. Pair that with the ability to drop massive damage on round 2 against the person with the highest attack. Shia kind of picks on the weak kids and the strong kids. You know, are you a little bit low in HP? Don't worry, I'm going to hit you in the face. Are you a really tough guy with a lot of attack? I'm also going to hit you in the face. She fears no man, and it's good. But Shia, really solid unit all around. When it comes to boss fights, those nasty dots definitely add up, that heavy burst damage. She hits pretty hard, a little bit squishy and kind of hard to keep alive early on, but once you get her to E3 and have that resilience passive popped up, she's a little easier to keep alive then, does pretty solid damage for bosses. When it comes to PvP, like I said, very solid nuke potential in PvP. She's just really an all-around good hero, and from Fortress faction, I would say she is, if not the best, definitely top tier. One that's worth building if you're going Fortress. Not a bad choice. Not a bad choice. That's going to bring us over here to eeny, meeny, miny. Where's it going to be? It's going to be Valentino. Okay, it's going to be Valentino. Again, one of the newer units of the Fortress faction. Valentino, unlike Shia, not really so much of a dual role unit. He doesn't really do super well in the PvE side of things in terms of boss fighting. He might have some use in the Aspen, but being that everyone uses Valkyrie for the Aspen pretty much, he doesn't have a lot of roles that she can't already deal for you. But when it comes down to PvP, Valentino's got it made. He has a lot of crowd control, decent damage built in on top of it. He hits pretty hard with some of his active skills. We'll talk about it. Let's get into it. Lots of text here, and that's always fun. Active skill attacks 4 random targets. One of those targets is going to take 165% of his attack as damage and has a 100% chance to be stunned. So one target takes kind of the lower end of his damage, but is guaranteed to be stunned unless they have like a stun immunity, which, you know, whatever, that happens. The second target is going to take 195% of his attack as damage, and it has a 50% chance to be stunned for 2 rounds. A third target takes 215% of his attack as damage, with a 30% chance to be stunned for 2 rounds, and the final target takes 275% of his attack as damage, and only hits one person with no chance to stun, okay? Now, when it comes to hitting a singular target, I still don't know how this skill works, okay? I don't believe it stacks all of them on one person, otherwise he would hit way harder in PvE than he does. I don't know if he just randomly picks one of them. Honestly, I have no idea. When it comes to his weird mechanics for 4 random enemies hitting one person, I have no idea which one it picks. I couldn't tell you. Could not tell you. But I do know when it comes to boss fighting, this guy does not do crazy damage. Now, I would say for a crowd control unit, he probably does better damage than most dedicated CC units will do. Like, you take Kamath into a boss fight, Kamath is going to hit like a wet noodle, and it's going to be sad for your whole life. Valentino will not hit huge numbers like a Shia is going to drop, absolutely no way, but he will do better than someone like Kamath. So, for a strictly crowd control based unit, he does better damage in boss fights than most strictly crowd control based units will. Moving on, the first passive. Each ally's active skill deals 165% of his attack as damage against one random enemy and has a 25% chance to stun enemies for 2 rounds. This is one of the really nice things about Valentino, is not only is he going to crowd control for you, he's going to give your entire team a little bit of extra damage, but also a chance to crowd control. And that's nice. It's really obviously the best in things like the Tower of Oblivion and in PvP, of course. Has no effect on bosses except for, I guess, the little extra damage tick. Will give you a little extra damage in boss fights. But the stun chance means nothing there. But either way, it's extra crowd control chance, and it doesn't limit itself just to Valentino. It goes to every single person on your team who can cast an active skill. It's pretty handy. It's not bad. It's pretty solid passive. Moving over, his second passive boosts his speed, HP, crit, and he's immune to being stunned. This is another thing that's really nice about PvP units. If you can get a PvP unit that has an immunity to a crowd control status effect, it's nice. In Valentino's case, he can't be stunned. So when you fight things like King Barton and Cruz, you don't have to worry about your Valentino taking that extra damage from King Barton because he's never going to be stunned. That's handy. Very much handy. You don't have to worry about Cruz's passive skill activating and stunning your Valentino. He's always going to be up when you're fighting stun units. Of course, he can still be frozen. You don't see a lot of freeze in top tier PvP. It's kind of a dead thing. Jara has a small chance to freeze. It's not really popular. You're more likely to get petrified. That's more often what's going to happen. Either way, solid passive skill. Definitely works out for him in PvP a lot. The crit's nice. Gives him a little extra burst potential. Not a bad deal. That brings us to his final passive, Barrier. While below 80% HP, he boosts his reduced damage by 50% for 5 rounds. This is nice. It's not as powerful as it once was, mainly because dot-based damage goes through reduced damage. So if a Valkyrie lands an active skill on Valentino and he gets hit by her big burn, his reduced damage isn't going to really make a difference there. He's going to take that huge brunt of the damage. But against any other unit in the game that's just randomly hitting him and attacking him, that reduced damage has a massive effect. It's still really strong. Even if Valkyrie is everywhere, it doesn't make Valentino really super bad because, you know, one unit doesn't really do that. But anyways, Valkyrie. Now I'm on Valkyrie. Oh god, the Valkyrie. Valentino, still solid, can take a lot of punishment, and it triggers really early in the battle. 80% HP is a pretty quick threshold to be hit, especially if you fight a Horus. That's going to be ticked on round 1 if you hit Horus. You're going to proc that block and you're going to be down to 80% HP. But either way, that reduced damage comes really in handy for keeping him alive. And obviously, you want to keep him alive to proc this. You want to keep that overload going and stunning your enemy team. It works. It just works. So like I said, not really a boss fighting unit. There's not a lot there, but when it comes to a solid CC unit that only does crowd control as their main role, he's definitely one of the higher PvE damage straight up crowd control units. So he's not really quote unquote dual role, but push come to shove, he will do the job better than someone like Kamath will. It's kind of his thing. So anyways, definitely a PvP unit. If you're going PvP, Valentino is not at all a bad choice from the Fortress faction. He is good. He is good. And that brings us to number 3. And now here's the thing. Number 3 is going to be a toss-up depending on which way you lean in the game. If you're a heavy PvP player or a heavy PvE player, this is where your decision will be influenced. And this is going to be a tie between Flamestrike and Sigmund, in my opinion. And here's why. If you're heavily into PvP, you will likely choose Flamestrike as the better unit, because she will function better in PvP. If you are a heavily PvE-minded player who loves boss damage, you're gonna go more towards Sigmund, because he works really well in boss fights. That's just kind of the way it's going to happen. So we're going to run them kind of both as a top 3/4. They're both top 3. They tie, okay? Everybody's a winner today, okay? But not really. Anyways, boom. We'll start with Sigmund. If you're into PvE, Sigmund will definitely be on your top tier list for Fortress faction because he has a lot of utility in PvE fights. So we'll just go through it and read it. First thing to note, he has the highest armor stat in the game right now, and that definitely pairs into some of his passive skills down here, so just keep that in mind. Boom. Active skill, Flame Bomb. It's a bomb of flames. That's always dangerous. I don't know what's wrong with me. Anyways, deals 166% of his attack as damage against 3 random enemies. You would say, that's not a lot of damage. It really isn't. That's not a huge amount of damage just flat out. But what it does is it reduces their armor by 30%. The block by 30% is not as big a deal. It has some uses in PvP fights. If you're trying to fight like Shias or Horuses, that can actually kind of come in handy. You just don't see it very much because it's a really specific role, and in PvP, you don't really want to choose like a super specific role unit most of the time. Either way, whatever. It's also going to drop a burn on the target, dealing an extra 54% of his attack as damage each round for 3 rounds, increasing the burning damage by 86% each round. Those burns are pretty important for Sigmund, and you'll know why right now. Boom. First passive. His basic attack has a 100% chance to reduce the target's armor by 24%, deals 45% of his attack as damage each round. That's a burn damage, by the way. It lasts for 4 rounds. He's also going to boost his own damage to the burning target by 40% for 4 rounds. This is where a lot of his damage comes from. He doesn't have a naturally high attack stat. He doesn't really hit super duper hard. But when you're pulling off massive amounts of armor from enemies, burning the enemy so you get dot damage, and also boosting the damage you're going to deal to the burning enemy, Now his attack actually starts to stack up a little bit. You start to see a lot more damage coming out of your Sigmund, and when you pair that with a super high armor stat and a pretty solid health stat, he's really tanky, and that's important. It means he stays alive longer in fights, to keep those burns up, to keep those dots rolling, and to keep hitting people. It boosts his damage pretty high. The second, I was going to say third, but it's not the third. It's the second passive click. You like that click animation noise thingy I made? It was awesome. But this is going to boost his armor by 48%, attack by 20%, HP by 30%, and precision by 30%. Kind of the run-of-the-mill passive. Not a ton of heroes get a boost to armor. I mean, there's a few out there. But in Sigmund's case, it makes a lot of sense for this last passive right here. When he's attacked by an enemy who has less armor than he does, he has a 100% chance to counterattack, dealing 180% of his attack as damage. Since he has the highest armor stat in the game for any basic unit, he will always counterattack any other unit. But when you fight bosses, they don't always have a lower armor stat than Sigmund. Doesn't matter. Sigmund's going to reduce their armor stat so that they will have less armor than Sigmund, and then he will counterattack them every single time. Sigmund is... That's kind of where Sigmund got his claim to fame, was the mass amount of counterattacks he'll do, and that's where a lot of his damage comes from. So if you're fighting a unit that attacks backline enemies, you're going to want your Sigmund on the backline. For any boss that's going to attack the one slot with their basic attack, that's where you want Sigmund, because it's going to give you the best amount of damage out of him, giving him access to more counters. He's going to keep reducing those armors, which is great, keeping those burns up. It not only boosts Sigmund's damage, but because you're reducing the armor, you're boosting your entire team's damage, and that's really important. It's not just that Sigmund runs a single role in a battle as being a damage dealer. He also runs the role of support by stripping armor for your team. So he's a really solid unit, very good for PvE. When it comes to PvP, you don't see a lot of Siggies up in PvP anymore. He gets crowd controlled to death, can't really do anything. But I guess if you're fighting somebody that really relies heavily on Shias or Horuses to do their damage, a Sigmund might not be a bad idea, because he's going to reduce their precision, or reduce their block, and he has innate precision to go through it. So that's not necessarily a bad thing. But 99% of cases, you don't run Sigmund in PvP. He's a PvE character. He fights bosses. That's his big role. When it comes to the Aspen Dungeon, at E3, of course, he can break nodes for you. And honestly, at E3, he could probably push Nightmare 50, maybe even Hell with some serious luck. I don't think he could, though. Damage over time probably get to him. But being super tanky is definitely a help when it comes to the Aspen Dungeon, especially when you're just doing like a single node break for your team. It means he's probably not going to die. He can get low HP, but you can potion him back to health for the next node you got to break. It's handy. But mainly, boss fighter. That's Sigmund's big deal. So if you're big into PvE, you're going to definitely take Sigmund as a top tier PvE unit. Moving over, we've got Flamestrike. Now, if you're more into the PvP side of things, Flamestrike's going to be more important to you than a Sigmund will be, because she just synergizes better in a PvP team. It's just kind of her thing. Back in the day, Flamestrike used to be a cheese unit, where essentially she gained attack and skill damage and crit damage as people died on the battlefield. And you started to see a lot of Flamestrike cheeses pop up, where people would build really weak teams around a Flamestrike, have them all die off, buff the Flamestrike to nuke the enemy team. Those died away a long time ago. They weren't really super duper prevalent here, but she got reworked because nobody was really using her anymore. The Flamestrike cheese was pretty much dead. It was only really useful in the Tower of Oblivion. So they said, you know what, we're going to make Flamestrike different. And they did. Absolutely did. Still has a hideous haircut, and they didn't fix that. But what are you going to do? You can't get everything. All right, you can't get everything. Her active skill, Breath of Fire, deals 276% of her attack as damage against 4 random enemies, burns the target, dealing an extra 50% of her attack as damage each round for 6 rounds, and it boosts her control immunity by 50% for 3 rounds. This is nice in a few ways. Her dots aren't really strong by themselves. They really aren't. But if you bring someone along like a Cthulhu who can burst burns, that's going to boost that damage a little bit and make it a little bit more, noticeable. By itself, it's not a big dot. It's not going to be crazy large. Large. Whatever. But her burst damage is up there. 276% of her attack is damage. That's a lot of damage. 276%. It's up there. But it's also going to boost her control immunity. Now, in PvP, that's a really big deal. If you can keep yourself from getting frozen, stunned, crap like that, it allows your damage to actually become damage instead of just having you stunned the entire battle, which makes a big difference. Sigmund would drop huge damage in PvP if he couldn't be crowd controlled. He would drop nasty damage, but he can be crowd controlled, and he constantly is, and he does no damage. Flame Strike at least has some resistance to that, and that's really important. Moving over to her first passive, when a hero is burned on the battlefield, that's any enemy, okay? Friendly, enemy, doesn't matter. If anyone gets burned, she's going to boost her self-attack by 2% and her skill damage by 4% for 4 rounds. Now this down here says when the same hero is burned for multiple times, this skill will only be triggered once. I do not believe that's actually true. Okay, the flame strikes that I've seen in my own testing, they will stack those burns, that passive. Even if you burn the same guy 2 or 3 times, she'll still get those stacks popping up. I don't know if that's a bug and wasn't intended to be a thing, or if they just wrote it completely wrong and it absolutely stacks up more than one time. I don't know. But I've seen flame strikes get, 30, 40, 50 stacks of their extra passive on round 1, which obviously would not be possible if they only landed that one time. So I don't know what the devs are doing with that or why it's written like that, but it doesn't really work that way. If they change it in the future, can't really help that. But for right now, that does stack up a lot, and it boosts her attack and skill damage by a lot. And that, paired with a pretty heavy damage on her active skill, boosts her burst damage to a pretty nasty level. Moving on. Her second passive. At the end of the round, she deals 25% of her attack as burning damage against all enemies each round for 6 rounds. Again, that dot is not big. It's a teeny tiny little bitty dot, doesn't do a lot of damage. If you carry a Cthulhu in, that might not be a bad deal to burst those and get a little extra damage out of them, a little more utility from it. But what it is going to do is proc this. It's going to help proc her first passive and boost her attack and her skill damage for the next round. And that's why it's actually kind of useful. On its face, it's really weak. It's not a heavy dot, but when you pair it with this, it becomes something. And that's kind of nice. Moving down the road, we've got the last passive here. This is the run-of-the-mill passive, kinda, with a couple differences. She has HP attack and crit damage buffs, but when she attacks a burning unit, she gains 50% crit. So she's far more likely to, crit on somebody that's burning, and since she's gaining a lot of attack, a lot of skill damage, with a heavy burst damage attack and some extra crit damage built into her, if you were to build a crit-based flame strike, you would get some really nukey damage out of her, especially paired with someone like Cthulhu, like I said, who not only will help trigger these weaker burns that she has, but also, when he's attacked, he burns enemies. So he will actually help stack up this passive for her, because it doesn't necessarily mean that only Flame Strike's burns will trigger this. Anyone that's burning, if the enemy has a Dragon Slayer who you attack it and it drops a burn on your team, she will get a stack of burn damage from it. So overall, when it comes to PvP, she's a very bursty hero. Now, because her attack hits 4 random enemies, when it comes to single target bosses, you won't see quite as big a damage. I haven't seen a lot of data out there on E3 Flame Strikes in boss battles. I would say her damage will not be anywhere near as high as what she can do in PvP, simply because you have less targets that can be burned, which will obviously limit the amount of stacking she's going to get from this. And if the enemy team doesn't burn anybody, if there's no one that burns on enemy teams, like if you're fighting a boss like Dark Arthidal, there's no burn action happening from their side. So you're only going to get burns that hit them. You're not going to get near as many stacks, so her nuke potential won't be nearly as big. Could she still be in a PvE team? Sure, but she's not going to do nearly as much damage in that role as someone who's dedicated towards it, like, a Shia. Even a Bloodblade will drop nasty damage in PvE if you can keep him alive. But like I said, that's mainly a PvP gal right here. All right, that's kind of her jam. Now, she's got a pretty high health stat, nearly 600,000 HP, which is not bad. A little bit lower speed, which doesn't necessarily hurt her so bad with the control immunity as it would if she didn't have any. Plus, it allows people to get those burn stacks on before she drops her active skill, which isn't bad. So all around, if you're going for PvP, Flame Strike is not to be overlooked. But if you're going to build her, you need to keep in mind that she needs synergy to work really well. A Flame Strike by herself will do okay, but if you pair a Flame Strike with like Cthulhu's, Valkyries, any unit that can burn as well, even a Fatmu, no joke, a Fatmu will help boost your Flame Strike's damage by a substantial amount, okay? It does make sense when you're burning people. You're going to want that Flame Strike to have as many burn allies and even enemies as possible. When you fight an enemy Valkyrie who burns your team, that's still going to add a stack to Flame Strike. So a very synergy-based hero. She doesn't just work in any team at all, but if you do have a lot of burn in your team, she's going to do pretty well. There we go. So those are what I would consider the top heroes of Fortress, and that moves down to what I would consider mid-tier. There's not a huge amount of mid-tier offerings here. Back in the day, I would say Ormus would be a mid-tier unit, but anymore, I wouldn't even say that. His heals are just so weak up until 10 star that it's really hard to justify building one until the priest buff drops. Hopefully it drops soon and it makes Ormus good again. Make Ormus good again. He's not. Make Ormus great again is definitely a movement that needs to be taking place because he's pretty bad. So I wouldn't really consider him an early to mid-tier hero right now. He doesn't offer very much. When it comes to the Aspen Dungeon, you could probably make it just as far with a 9-star Norma as you could with a 9-star Ormus. And that's no joke. You might even make it farther. He's just not that great. But the units you could still use in an early to mid-game team and gain decent results with, I would say would be Ice Blink, even though Ice Blink is an old hero and he's not super useful anymore in the late game at all really because he's so slow. Early to mid-game, when you're fighting people that are also early to mid-game, he does have a lot of skills that do, that are nice. A nice chance to freeze all the enemies. Crowd control, obviously more for PvP in the tower. Not a bad deal. Gives himself some extra energy as well to get him toward the next active skill cost. He does extra damage to frozen enemies, so he does synergize with himself pretty well to get extra damage out. Not a really damage-dealing monster, but, it's thing. It's thing. And then his passive here, when he gets attacked by an enemy, he reduces their attack and boosts his own attack. And that's also kind of nice as a debuff. You can lower someone's attack by a little bit, gain your own attack. But because he's so slow, and you just don't see a lot of freeze anyway in the top tier units anymore, mainly because if Ice Blink had like a 2020 speed, you'd probably still see him a lot. He doesn't have it. He does not have that kind of speed. So he's really fallen off in the late game area, but early to mid game, he'll still work for you as crowd control and PvP in the tower. It's not going to be a bad deal. Amazing. But other than that, you're not going to get a lot of use out of him. He's not a boss fighter. He's not an Aspen Dungeon runner. He's primarily PvP, and since he's just only really early to mid game PvP with not a lot of dual role usage, you don't see many builds of him anymore. But if you're in a pinch, there's no reason not to. If you really, what if you looked at Ice Blink and said, you know what, Ice Blink? I like you. I like you mucho. I want you in my team, even if you're not the best. You know what? There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. If you love Ice Blink and he's your favorite hero in the game, build him. At the end of the day, this is still a game. We're still doing this to have fun, entertain ourselves. So, if you say, you know what, Honor Guard is just schmexy. I'm all about that dwarf action. Yeah. Build an Honor Guard. You know what? Have a good time with it. It's not all about always building the meta units. If you have a good time building weak units, absolutely do it. It's game time, peeps. Whatever. So anyways, with that said, Ice Blink, nice early to mid-game hero, does not carry well to the end game. Definitely not. Moving over, another one you could use in early to mid-game and have decent success would be Mickey. She has a decent amount of damage. 302% of her attack is damage on her active skill, hits 4 enemies, and boosts her attack by 40% for 3 rounds to get a little extra damage. Her natural attack is a little low. She is still really fast, which isn't bad. But back in the day, when she didn't have block, but instead she had dodge, that was changed, by the way. There was a change a while back. Block didn't used to be a thing. It was dodge, and dodge was exactly what it sounded like. You dodged attacks. If dodge procced, they missed. And that you've seen a lot more Mickeys back then because she would dodge and people would not be able to build active skill energy because they couldn't hit her. And that was nice. When they changed it, almost everybody quit using her pretty much like the next day because she really wasn't nearly as good for what people were using her for. She still is really fast. She still has a decent amount of block, which keeps her alive, especially because she heals when she blocks. It can be nice for survivability. She has decent damage, nothing crazy. Her basic attack hits frontline enemies, reduces their precision. Not a huge buff there. But like I said, early to mid-game, you could still get some decent use out of Mickey. I would say she would be a really nice early game Aspen Dungeon hero, just because you can get her to build block pretty easily. What is that? 8-star unit is going to have block, a decent block chance with a pretty nice heal on that block. So I would say Mickey could still be useful in like an early game, mid game Aspen Dungeon sense. Maybe even a little bit of PvP for damage or boss damage, but she's not going to hit super duper hard, so you will get rid of her later on, at least unless they change her down the road. We never know. For right now, she's just right there at that mid-tier range. She's not as great. She used to be awesome, and now she's like way less awesome. So, like I said, and the way the game works now anyways, with the regression features, the converting features, it's not really a huge terrible deal to build an earlier mid-tier hero because you have the copies of it. It's not a bad thing. You can still use those, convert them over to a Shia later down the road, or regress her and get her fodder back and build somebody else in a whole nother faction. It's not really super bad to build any unit that you want to build nowadays. It doesn't really hurt you that bad. And the last one I would say is considered a mid-tier hero in Fortress would be Emily. Now, Emily used to be another one of those heroes like Iceblink who was really popular a while ago, but with recent changes to the game, she kind of fell out of the spotlight. She's not used nearly as much, but she's a decent support, primarily a PvP support, but she will have some use in PvE, but you'd probably rather build a Rosa or a Cruz and get better results. But anyways, her active skill hits all enemies, reduces their precision by 40%. Not a super important thing. That could be a lot of different things that would make a lot of better sense on her, but it's a thing, that's what she has. But the big thing is it's going to boost your speed by 30 points and attack by 20 points, 20%, not 20 points, 20% for all your allies. That's not a bad deal. It's going to make you hit a little bit harder. It's going to make you faster. For PvP, that extra speed is kind of important. It's not a bad deal to have it. But she's really, really slow and has no crowd control immunity, which means in 99% of cases, she's not going to get a lot of active skill casts out before she's crowd controlled to death and can't really do anything for your team. If Emily had like an innate crowd control immunity, like she couldn't be stunned or couldn't be petrified, she would be a far more useful unit, and I bet you'd see a lot more actually make their way back into the game. As of right now, early to mid-game, she'll still work for you, but you'll probably trade her out later on for a better support like Belrain, who's the queen of supports right now. Anyways, that's kind of her big deal. She gets plus 50 speed, and she's still slow as balls, so I don't know, that's just not very good. Her basic attack reduces target's crit, hits 3 enemies. That's not a bad deal. It's got some utility there. Reducing crit isn't a bad thing. And again, you're going to get some niceness out of that. It's not all bad. She's just not super great in-game, so you don't see a lot of them then. But her biggest selling point would probably be her last passive. When she gets below 50% health, she's going to boost your entire team's attack by 29%. Why 29%? I don't know. Should be 30 or 25. Come on, devs. You're killing me here with 29%. What is that crap? But it's also going to reduce all the enemy's armor by 29% as well. So this is not a bad deal. It's not only going to make the enemies take more damage because they're losing armor, it's going to boost your entire team's attack to make them deal even more damage. When you pair that with her active skill that can add attack, it's not necessarily a bad run in early PvP or early PvE. You can get some utility out of her. Generally, Rose is going to do better against bosses because he strips armor consistently and not just once at 50% health. He still boosts your attack. But like I said, early to mid game, Emily's not a terrible support. You will get some use out of her. If obviously if you don't like her later down the road, it's not a big deal. You can drop a regression on her, get her fodder back, and feed her into somebody else. Or you can just convert her into like a Valentino, a Sigmund, whatever the crap you want to convert her into, you can. So everything else on the board here is pretty much fodder tier. When it comes to Honor Guard, Bleaker, Mirage, Odio 1, Ormus, they're generally considered fodder. You're going to use those to upgrade better units because they don't have a lot of viability. I mean, they all have something they could do. Like if you really loved Honor Guard, he does have some passives that are pretty handy. When he falls will have health, he boosts your entire team's armor by 100%. So he doubles your entire team's armor for 3 rounds. It makes your team take much less damage, and it's not a bad passive. But he's just not super duper great. He has some crit. When he gets crit, he has a counterattack that does very low damage because he has very low attack. He has some crowd control built into him, gets some reduced damage, but with no crowd control resistance, he gets stunned to death. He just doesn't really do a whole lot for you on offense. But either way, like I said, every unit that's here can do something. They just don't do it really well. That's why they're considered fodder tier units. So anyways, that's Fortress Faction nipped in the bud. These 4 down here, definitely your best picks if you're wanting to go for that top tier, best in slot kind of units. These will be the ones you're going to want to run. But like I said, if you just really enjoy building wacky units or Mirage is like the favorite unit in the game for you, like I just love Mirage, then you should build what you want to build, have a good time, play the game and enjoy it, because that's what it's all about, peeps. It's a game. It's a game for fun, and we're supposed to have fun. That's what the devs want. They want us to have fun and to spend our monies. They want both. But anyways, that is going to be it for today, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. If you liked the video, please make sure, smash that thumbs up button and show your support if you haven't already. Don't forget to subscribe as well, and tell your friends about it, because that definitely helps me out a lot. and I will see you guys in the next one.